whether it's COVID or the economy or racism, why are they talking everything down, do you think?
Well, part of it is to lower expectations. The economy is really bad. COVID's all screwed up. It's all bungled. It's going to be really hard to get these things fixed. And then as people get their vaccinations and the economy begins to rebound as a result of it being opened up, they can say, look at us, didn't we do a great job? The racism thing to me is, I was offended in the speech. I mean, I thought it was a good speech. It wasn't a great speech, but it was a good speech, and it was the right speech for the moment. But there was a point in there where he said, we're divided as a country between the people who believe in the American ideal and racism, nativism, and fear. No. We're divided as a country politically over questions of policy and direction and respect, but we're as united as a country against racism and nativism. There are people in this country who are racist, there are people who are nativists, but the vast majority of Americans stand together on those issues. And that was an attempt to basically say, if you're not for me, you're part of the group that's racist and nativist and fear-mongering, which I didn't think was a good note to strike.
Now, right off the bat, Karl Rove says that he was personally offended by the part of Biden's speech that criticized racism. Let me just say, first and foremost, if you're offended when someone condemns racism, then you might just be telling on yourself. Rove may be clutching his pearls over the audacity of Biden to claim that those opposed to the American ideal are for racism, nativism, and fear, but he'd have a leg to stand on if it wasn't absolutely true. The Trump administration was wholly predicated on appealing to those elements, as was the rest of his Republican mouthpieces and conservative media. How many times did we hear radical leftists, or radical socialists, or radical Marxists to describe Democrats, even moderate Democrats, as a way to scare conservative voters? What about migrant caravans full of Latinos that are going to sell drugs to your kids and rape your wives? What about Asians that are going to infect you with COVID-19? Or immigrants that are going to fundamentally change the way America looks? Or how saying happy holidays is a way to erase Christianity? We could go on all day, but the point is that this is nothing more than bad faith white grievance. Rove knows full well what the Republican Party does to win elections, and that sure as hell isn't by appealing to our better angels. And beyond that, the entire premise of this segment is fundamentally flawed. Bill Hemmer presents COVID, the economy, and racism as being talked down by the Democrats, which Karl Rove goes on to suggest is just to lower expectations so that Democrats can then clear those bars, which could not be more insane. The reason that COVID, the economy, and racism are being talked down is because they're all in dismal shape. We are, objectively, not succeeding in the slightest with regard to any of those categories. They're being talked down because if they were any lower, we'd have to get shovels and start digging. I get that Republicans have been carrying water for Trump for months and pretending that COVID is fine, just fine, but it's not. We've had more than 400,000 Americans die. It's among the worst mass casualty events in American history, surpassed only by the Civil War and the 1918 pandemic. And for a network that spent the better part of a decade railing against 4 American deaths in Benghazi, it is an entirely new level of hypocrisy for them to pretend that almost 500,000 dead Americans from a bungled pandemic response is no big deal. As for the economy, we're mired in the worst economic downturn of our lifetimes. When judged against the Great Recession, far more jobs have been lost now, unemployment is higher, the economy contracted more sharply, and the government is spending more. We are in a dire economic position, and it's only been exacerbated by what had been the Republican Party's obstinate refusal to lift a finger for any Americans who weren't CEOs. We were promised a jobs boon. Instead, Trump left office with the biggest jobs contraction in our lifetimes. And finally, where do we even begin with racism? The last 4 years have been everything from dog whistles to outright bullhorns. From equating the protesters at Charlottesville with the neo-Nazis to refusing to condemn the Proud Boys, Trump and Republicans have shown nothing but deference to hate groups. We've seen the villainization of Mexicans as drug dealers and rapists. We've seen the villainization of Muslims as justification to enact xenophobic travel bans. We've watched as both Republicans running in the Georgia Senate election distorted images of their Democratic opponents to make Raphael Warnock's skin look darker and to make Jewish candidate Jon Ossoff's nose look larger. The Republican Party is not only not doing anything to curb racism, they are actively leaning into it. So with all of that said, it's not that Democrats are lowering expectations so they can claim an easy victory, it's that expectations are already on the floor because Republicans left them that way. It wasn't Democrats who failed at responding to COVID, it was Republicans. It wasn't Democrats who were in charge of the worst economic downturn in our lifetimes, it was Republicans. And it wasn't Democrats who whipped up as much racism as they could manage, it was Republicans. If the bar is low, that is because Republicans set it there. While you're here, please check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. I take a deep dive into the top stories of the week, and I also interview major players in the world of politics, like Kamala Harris, Adam Schiff, Nancy Pelosi, Pete Buttigieg, Katie Porter, Al Franken, Cory Booker, Jamie Harrison, Mary Trump, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.